What I'm about to tell you is not being discussed on CNBC, not being explained by crypto Twitter, and definitely not being broken down for retail investors the way it should be. Because while everyone was distracted by the daily price candles, a quiet earthquake at the Supreme Court level just shifted the entire legal chessboard. And if you understand how this system really works, you'll realize this could directly impact XRP holders in ways that most people are completely unprepared for. I am not exaggerating when I say this changes everything. Ask yourself right now, why would the highest legal authority in the United States suddenly pull the plug on agency power at the exact moment BlackRock and the IMF are all accelerating their move into tokenized finance? This is not random. This is not a coincidence, and this is not something you want to hear about after the move has already happened, because a legal pressure point is forming at the very top of the judicial system, and XRP sits directly in the blast radius. Now here is the setup nobody is talking about. To understand the future of XRP, you have to understand a term that most people find boring, but institutions find terrifying. Chevron deference. For decades, this legal loophole allowed agencies like the SEC to act as judge, jury, and executioner. They could basically rewrite the rules of the game while the game was being played, but the Supreme Court just took that power away by overturning this doctrine. The highest court has effectively macapped the SEC's ability to stretch outdated laws to fit modern digital assets. Think about this logically. If the SEC can no longer self-interpret vague statutes, what happens to the single most high-profile case in history? The legal shield they used to attack Ripple for years has just been shattered. This isn't just a win for a company. It's a systematic reset of the entire regulatory battlefield. While the mainstream media stays silent, the legal blast radius is already clearing a path for a new era of clarity. And what's coming next involves names like BlackRock and the IMF in a way that should make every holder pay very close attention. Why is it that at the exact moment the SEC's legal authority began to crumble? Firms like BlackRock, Fidelity, and even global bodies like the IMF started moving at lightning speed. This is where you need to slow down and really listen, because retail is trained to react to headlines while institutions position ahead of the law. Think about the contradiction here. We are told there is regulatory uncertainty, yet BlackRock CIA is expanding its tokenization initiatives and filing for new digital asset frameworks daily. Ask yourself, does a trillion-dollar firm like BlackRock CK move without absolute legal certainty? Absolutely not. They don't gamble. They positioned. They saw the Supreme Court signal long before it became a public headline. Now look at the IMF. They are no longer just talking about blockchain as an experiment. They are openly discussing a global liquidity bridge, an interoperable infrastructure that can move value across borders in seconds. And who has been building those exact rails for over a decade. While other projects were focused on hype and memes, Ripple was in a courtroom, forcing the SEC to expose every inconsistency in their logic. It's almost as if the legal battle wasn't a hurdle, but a stress test. A way to prove to the global financial elite that this specific asset could survive the absolute worst the U.S. government could throw at it. And now that the Supreme Court has restricted the AY's power, the regulatory fog isn't just lifting, it's being intentionally cleared to make room for the new financial plumbing. Major banks are no longer experimenting with on-demand liquidity. They are demanding it. They need a system that is protected by law, not punished by it. The timing here is chilling. You have a systemic reset occurring at the highest judicial level, while simultaneously the largest pools of capital on Earth are aligning their technology with Ripple's infrastructure. This isn't just a trend, it's a convergence. And if you think the mainstream media is going to explain this to you before the move happens, you haven't been paying attention to how the big money operates. They need the exit liquidity of the confused to fund the entry of the informed. Now we reach the catalyst phase. And this is where the fear, uncertainty, and doubt are intentionally injected to shake weak hands right before the narrative flips. Have you noticed a pattern? Every time XRP approaches a structural inflection point, the same psychological warfare appears. Random sell-offs, sudden negative headlines about lawsuits being over, but adoption being dead, and recycled talking points designed to make you blink. It is all a calculated distraction meant to make you ignore the massive legal trigger forming in the background. Think about the irony here. The Supreme Court is tightening the leash on the SEC. Enforcement-driven regulation is collapsing under its own weight. Yet, the social media sentiment is at an all-time low. This is not an accident. The FUD artists will tell you that the legal updates don't matter for price. They'll say the market has already moved on. But ask yourself this brutal question. If legal clarity didn't matter, why did Ripple fight for years instead of settling quietly like every other project? Why did they spend hundreds of millions of dollars to force the SEC to expose its hand? They knew that in the world of global finance, you don't win by being popular. You win by being infrastructure. The psychological trap is designed to make you feel like you are wrong right up until the moment reality catches up. Retail investors are trained to buy the hype and sell the boredom. But institutions, they do the exact opposite. They load their positions when the room is quiet, when the volume dries up, and when the average investor has finally given up. This is the calm before the systemic reset. While the public is arguing about daily price scandals, the foundations for a multi-trillion-dollar tokenized future are being bolted into place. The question you need to ask yourself right now is simple. Are you watching the noise, or are you watching the structure? Because once the clarity becomes obvious to everyone, the opportunity window will have already slammed shut. Now comes the part that makes people uncomfortable. The logic behind the revaluation and the final warning for those who think this is just another speculative pump. You see, price does not move on hype alone forever. It moves when narratives align with math and when legality meets utility. XRP sits at the intersection of all three. If this Supreme Court pressure continues to restrict regulatory overreach, think about what repricing actually means. It's not a random green candle. It's the global market reassessing risk. When legal risk collapses, capital flows change direction violently. Institutions do not need XRP to be a cheap coin. They need it to be a liquid bridge. Think about this logically. The IMF and major central banks are discussing a world where trillions in nostro vestro balances, money just sitting idle in foreign bank accounts, are freed up using digital bridge assets. For that to work, the asset must have deep, massive liquidity. It must be able to handle a $5 billion transfer without moving the price more than a fraction of a percent. This is where the triple-digit whispers come from. Not from moonboys on Twitter, but from institutional architects who understand that for a bridge to carry the weight of the global financial system, it cannot be valued like a speculative toy. Once certainty arrives and the Supreme Court effectively kneecaps the SEC's ability to interfere, XRP's historical discount evaporates. Markets don't adjust slowly to that kind of realization. They gap. The most dangerous moment isn't the crash, it's the silence right before the revaluation when volumes rise up, influencers get bored, and conviction is tested. That is historically when positions are transferred from impatient hands to strategic ones. I am not telling you that it will happen tomorrow. I am telling you that ignoring a legal macro catalyst because the price hasn't reacted yet is exactly how people miss generational moves. The signal is clear, but only for those who are actually looking. Here is how this ends. Not with fireworks on the chart tomorrow, not with a headline spoon-fed by mainstream media, but with a slow, heavy realization that something foundational has shifted. While most people were distracted by noise, the Supreme Court update is not about XRP in name. It is about authority. It is about principle. And principles are what decide the winners when global systems evolve. XRP holders need to understand that being early feels exactly like being wrong, right up until the moment reality catches up, and by then the opportunity window has already narrowed. Ask yourself this final extreme question. If the SEC's grip has weakened, if enforcement-based fear has lost its teeth, and if the world's largest institutions are already positioning for a regulated, tokenized future, where does that leave an asset that was stress-tested in court, integrated into enterprise rails, and discussed in the same breath as global liquidity infrastructure? This is why the silence from the establishment is louder than any headline. Revaluation does not need your permission. It only needs clarity, and that clarity is creeping in through the highest legal channels in the country. The mainstream will explain this after the move. Influencers will pretend they saw it coming, and retail will wonder why it felt so obvious in hindsight. The only decision that matters now is whether you are reacting to fear or recognizing structure. Because history does not reward comfort. It rewards those who pay attention when the room is quiet and the signal is clear. Until next time.